Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw The Wild Robot surprise everybody with a very strong opening weekend of $35 million. Definitely not the biggest of releases when it comes to animated features, but the fact that this film, as a relatively new property, right, not really a well-known IP, apparently it is based off of a book, but as we saw with a previous release in the case of Harold the Purple Crayon, having a source material book that you are basing your film upon does not always guarantee any type of success. And in fact, in that case, it ended up losing to quite a bit of money lost in the theatrical release for that movie. Wild Robot right now from Universal looks like it's going to be a pretty good performer based off of this very strong number for a relatively unknown property. And we'll continue to follow this as the weeks go ahead. But ultimately, yeah, a number one spot, number one finish for this movie, bumping out Beetlejuice from the number one spot, which got the number two spot, in this case, a very strong number two. All the while, Transformers 1 saw a massive drop from week 1 to week 2. So for a film like it, right, for a Transformers film, but also more importantly for an animated film that's more geared towards, kids and family audiences, to drop 62% in your opening weekend after a pretty disappointing opening in the first place, yeah. This is not a good sign for them. And right now, based off the fact that we now have 2 weeks worth of data, we can now project this film will indeed be a box office flop unless it has a massive turnaround in any of the international markets. But as of right now, that does not seem to be the case. We'll talk about these. Also, Megaflopolis. That's right, the name is now officially going to stick with this film getting single digits, getting in below initial anticipation, initial numbers, and apparently a very confused story is a big reason as to why that is the case. So we'll talk about that as well. And let's go ahead and just dive straight into these numbers. No other things to be said today. So The Wild Robot indeed got that number one spot. $35 million, $8,800 per screen. Very impressive numbers there. Beetlejuice at $16 million, only a 38% drop from its third week of release going into now its fourth weekend of release. Very impressive still, $4,000 per screen. Clearly, this movie is winning amongst fans. I know that there's some hardcore fans out there that did not like the movie, that thought the film was terrible, but hey, does it really matter? Because there are enough people out there that are clearly enjoying this film quite a bit, both fan and also normie audience alike. $250 million, it is now officially crossed here domestically. Very impressive numbers. A big win for Warner Brothers, which has been a studio that has not had the best of showings, the best of circumstances for their overall film releases over the last several years, it seems. Transformers 1, as I had mentioned, at Paramount Pictures, dropping 62% to get only $9.3 million, bringing its total domestic to only $39.1 million, a total international of only $55 million. After 2 weeks of release, as of the recording of this video. Obviously, there could be some internationals that have not yet reported. It is still yet to be released in certain places, but based off of what we're seeing right now, it does not seem like there's going to be anything to come in to save it, and with a much smaller budget compared, especially to other Transformers movies, this is definitely, I think, a bad sign for them. One could easily argue that they might be able to make some money down the line. I know that there's some who say, oh, but the toy sales, here's the biggest problem with that. Those toy sales are things where, yeah, don't you already every single year already have a bunch of people, a bunch of kids, a bunch of adults who are fans of the franchise buying those toys every year, regardless of the film or not? So to try to argue that point, you would have to prove that there are specific numbers of toy sales that are exclusively because of this movie, that are from people who saw this movie, who are from people who are fans of this movie. So unless you can actually prove that, those numbers cannot really be accounted for as far as the overall financials of Transformers 1. We're not talking about Paramount Pictures here. We're not talking about any of the companies behind the Transformers brand as being a failure. We're talking about Transformers 1 as a theatrical release. Right now, objectively speaking, is a failure. Especially when you look at this number in the domestic marketplace. For it to have this kind of a drop-off, this kind of a performance this early on, usually you don't have international coming in to save the day if it's doing this poorly in the domestic marketplace. And so as of right now, based on the projections, based on the data crunching that we do here on the channel, yeah, this film set to be a pretty massive flop, comparatively, especially to a very small budget to boot. Coming in number 4, very surprising move here, Devara Part 1. This is, I believe, one of the Bollywood releases, so $5.6 million, so pretty strong showing there for a limited release movie. Speak No Evil dropping the number 5 spot, dropping 26% in its third week of release after dropping from 714 screens. So again, I think this film essentially has done what it was set out to do, not be the biggest moneymaker in the world, but be able to get enough people's attention to make a little bit of profit. Not, is to be said, not the case really when it comes down to Megalopolis, because this film should have known it was destined for failure with the distributor of the movie being Lionsgate. Lionsgate has just not had any good luck or good fortune this year, the last couple of years. I mean, every film that they've had released has been a massive failure, a massive disappointment, and that is not going to stop here. With Lionsgate's Megalopolis, again, distribution here, I believe most of the film's funds were actually put forward by the director, Francis Ford Coppola, and his vanity project, as it's being described, only to $4 million domestically. We have no internationals being reported as of yet. So, yeah, not looking good for Megalopolis at all. This film set to be a massive, catastrophic failure, one of the biggest box office numbers, one of the biggest box office flops, we could really say, of this year. So Megaflopolis is definitely a name that has been suggested by some and is now absolutely going to be sticking. What is also sticking around is Deadpool Wolverine, dropping from 475 screens. Let's go ahead and see if we can actually pull up our theater counts here just to get a better idea. So again, as I mentioned about Tavara, limited release at only 1,000 screens. Speak No Evil at 2,600. Megaflopolis, I should say, at 1,800. So a limited release, but yeah. Not really that good. Deadpool Wolverine at only 1,900 screens after 10 weeks of release. Again, continuing to make multiple millions of dollars every single weekend. So this film still has a chance to eke out maybe 640, with the highest end being 650. I don't think it's going to leg out to 650, but 640 is definitely on the cards for this movie. My old ass from Amazon MGM. I've heard great things about it from the guys over at Film Threat. It's on my list of films that I want to watch. Fortunately, there's some illness going around, so please pray for the Lady Freya as she is dealing with some illness. I've got a monitor up right here, making sure that my son is okay. My daughter's room is right above me, and so I can hear her if she screams, and so it's like, okay, that's where I am right now. So if you see me looking over here, it's because I'm checking in on my son. And if you see me kind of looking up above, it's because I'm trying to make sure I'm not hearing that. But I'm really trying to see as many movies as I can. It's a lot harder, obviously, when people are sick around the house. But hopefully you can get this movie and can be able to get some reviews out there. But I've heard great things. 706% increase in its overall totals, because obviously it was only at like a handful of theaters before, and now it's at 1,390. So again, Film Threat guys gave very glowing reviews to this movie, so that's the only reason why I have any interest in it myself. Never Let Go, a horror film, dropping only 51% in its second week of release, so not the biggest of releases in the world, but yeah, definitely not the worst numbers that we've seen. This actually had some of the most potential for a Lionsgate film, but now that we do have these 2 weeks, even though these numbers are not terrible as far as the week 1 to week 2 drop, that week 1 number was still pretty low, right? That week 1 number was still pretty weak, right? Only about maybe 5 to 6 million, if memory serves. And so making only $2.2 million on this weekend in the second weekend of release is just not really going to cut it. This movie didn't cost all that much to make, but you need to make a lot more than that if you're going to make your money back, and it's not looking like that's going to happen. Lionsgate continuing to have flop after flop, probably going to be the biggest loss leader this year when it comes to overall financials and overall financial losses in general. And then coming in right now at the number 10 spot, because there's still some movies that have not yet been reported. For instance, there's a brand new film called Lee. No numbers being reported as of the recording of this video, and also the same can be said for The Bagman, which I believe both of those were very, very limited in general for their release, and so whether or not they are able to make money, I would say I probably have my doubts, because if you don't have numbers being reported as of now, that's never a good sign on this point on a Sunday. By the way, blessed Sunday to everyone out there. Let's go to the actual full numbers here. So first, The Wild Robot at $53 million, looking at itself to be a pretty successful little project, right? So this film doing much better than I think anyone would have expected it to, for being a pretty much no-name concept. This is something that I had never heard of before. I think a lot of people probably did not know it was previously based off of a book. And as I mentioned earlier with Harold and the Purple Crayon, that doesn't always guarantee much of anything. And so clearly this film is resonating with audiences. I've heard glowing reviews of this movie. I mean, people who are, grown men saying, yeah, I cried at this movie, or I teared up a little bit at this movie. And so clearly it's reaching out all across the spectrum. It seems like it's reaching out to moms, because apparently there is a level of a mother-son story dynamic. Clearly there's also a connection here to fatherhood as well, just I think parenthood in general. So yeah, that's the kind of movie that Hollywood needs to be making these days if it's going to want to make any money back, and it looks like Universal is going to have a win on its hands. Let's go ahead and put this up against the Garfield film. I believe this is the Garfield film from just earlier in this year, just to kind of give a bit of a metric here as far as where it is. Wild Robot actually overperforming against the Garfield movie, right? So $35 million opening versus a $24 million opening. And the Garfield movie, remember, came out over the summertime. So that film ended up getting to around $255 million. I think Wild Robot has a lot more potential to do even better. And based off of what people are saying about the film, this movie could honestly be one of these surprise hits at this time of the year, right? Typically, you don't have massive box office coming in around the September area. Obviously, you do have early October with releases like Joker, for instance, right? The original one from 2019 got to over $1 billion, but still, that took a little while, and in this case, right, I don't think anyone really saw this one coming, and I don't think a lot of people had it on their bingo card either, but hey, kudos to The Wild Robot for doing well. This is also a film. Usually I don't want to see kids' movies in theaters, but this apparently is kind of like the old school animated films that Disney used to be very good at making, and obviously Universal has also had a hand in as well, being able to put out films that appeal not only to kids and not only to parents, but really just people of all ages and sizes. Beetlejuice, as I had mentioned, coming in the number 2 spot, $373 million there. So even though the film's overall numbers historically not the highest that we've ever seen, it's still doing well enough in various places to be able to continue to add to its overall profits. Transformers 1, on the other hand, not so much. So some have said, okay, well, just wait for this film to get fully released in the international markets. And if we go ahead and look at this, right now it is the 29th of September is when we're recording this. So as of right now, it is not yet released in Austria. It is not released in Belgium. Let's see. It is also not released in the Czech Republic. It has not released in France or Germany. So I guess you could say there's some box office that could be there. Hungary and Israel, not a whole lot of box office there, if we're going to be honest. Norway, not a lot of box office there. Slovakia, not a lot of box office there. Switzerland times 3, also not a lot of box office there. In any of those cases, Ukraine, not much there. And then really the only major hitter you have is the UK. And there's just not really enough data at this point to suggest that those international markets are going to show up in any crazy degree for this movie, all right? And if you're going to say, well, hey, guess what? Those numbers haven't all updated yet. Well, the chart itself doesn't update until Monday or Tuesday, but the totals, those do come in pretty quickly. And so even though this number could easily be changed, right, it's not going to be enough. I can already tell you right now, it's not going to, based on where this film is currently tracking domestically, we usually see a very similar result from domestic international as far as the tracking in general, right? If we're talking about overall totals, obviously there's been times before where the international grossly outweighs that of domestic. But typically, if you're looking at it as a week-to-week percentage number, if a week-to-week drop number, you're usually not seeing too much discrepancy there, because if a film is really good and very popular, it's popular all across the world typically. And so I think Transformers 1 right now showing itself to be a flop, even though the film had all the potential in the world to actually be a Transformers film that could make their money back. And I've heard a lot of positive things about this movie, in fact, but I think, honestly, it's now been confirmed that the Michael Bayverse Transformers movies absolutely have destroyed the entirety of the IP as far as the cinematic universe of Transformers being concerned. Now, could the film maybe make some money back in streaming? Potentially. This is a Paramount movie, and guess what? That means typically it's going to go on to Paramount Plus, which means that they're not getting any money from that because that's their own streaming service. Unless they're going to do the whole Disney, hey, we're going to pay ourselves for the rights to stream our own movie, which is ridiculous and does not actually account for anything. Yeah. Theatrically, though, we could say this film is going to be a flop. Devara Part 1, another, again, show here that there seems to be a clear market for Bollywood films, not just from any potential Indian communities here in the United States, but I think general audiences actually are starting to become a lot more fans of what Bollywood is offering, especially with what little is being offered by Hollywood these days. Speak No Evil, $57.7 million. Again, not the biggest release in the world, but cost not too much money. So able to make some money back there. Megaflopolis is indeed a massive, massive flop. We got Deadpool Wolverine, $1.3 billion. My Old Ass at $2.8 million. Never Let Go at $8.3. Not a whole lot being reported there internationally yet. The Substance, same thing here, $6.8 million, 2.4 for a total of $9.3 million as of the recording of this video. Keep in mind, right, this is an independent film. It's probably going after some of that Oscar buzz, and apparently it is a very, very divisive movie because it is a body horror film, and that is just gonna be a hard sell for a lot of people. I don't suspect this film to be a big moneymaker, at least when it comes to its theatrical release. Going to the charts, because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. Just to give you an idea, going in order here, first with Megaflopolis, the film cost around $120 million. That was the last reported budget that I saw, which means that only $4 million domestic and no internationals to be reported of. Right now, it's sitting at $177 million in financial losses. Yeah. That is how bad this movie is currently doing, which is just awful. So do not expect any money to be made back from Megaflopolis, and expect it to be potentially one of the big box office flops of the year. Going over to Lee now, as I'd mentioned, no numbers being reported here domestically. It did have an international report of 2.5. I think it got an early release there, but the early indication that I've found, at least, and again, that's why there's a line through it, so take it with a grain of salt. I heard the budget was somewhere around $35 million, which means it needs to make around maybe $87.5 to $100 million to break even. I don't think that's going to happen with these kinds of numbers. If it's so low that you're not even reporting it, do not suspect Lee to make any money back. And based on the trailers, I would say good. I'm glad that kind of movie isn't making any money, or not projected to make any money. What I do think will end up making money, though it definitely has a long way to go, is the film The Wild Robot. So at $53 million worldwide as of this video, $90 million in financial losses at this point in time. This film was not the cheapest in the world. It did cost around $78 million. That's still on the low end of things. I do think because of the success of what we've seen this and how we compare this to a film like Garfield, for instance, that might be an interesting one to have the day-to-day from this point forward numbers being compared with, because you're dealing with summertime numbers in the case of Garfield. And so if this movie is able to beat the day-to-day numbers, especially during the weekdays, compared to that one, that I think is going to be a strong sign that the longevity of the film is going to be quite long-lasting. And so if that is the case, if you look at Garfield, that film was able to make well over $200 million by the end of its run worldwide, around $255 million. I think $300+ million is now on the table, we could say, for a film like The Wild Robot, which means, I think this movie is definitely going to be able to make its money back and also make a decent amount of profit as well. And kudos to them for making a property that people actually want to see based on the numbers that we're seeing. So very good sign for that. Not a good sign for The Bagman. Same thing with the numbers. We have an estimate of around $15 million budget. Who knows if that's the case or not. No numbers are being reported. And so no matter how much this film costs, I think flop is definitely on the table for that as a movie. Transformers 1. So now we have the films that have had now 2 weeks of release. So based on the fact that we now have Transformers 1 at $55.7 million after 2 weeks of release, that means based off of the historical standard, I've been tracking this stuff for a long time. I've compared other films historically, and what I found is most films tend to make between 70 to 50% of their entire box office in the first 2 weeks of release. There's a range there because depending on how big that first weekend drop off is, that first to second weekend drop off, and then down the line, second to third, fourth to fifth, etc., determines basically where we could expect the film to fall. So at $55.7 million, I'm projecting the film to end somewhere between $79.6 and $111.5 million. So in a best case scenario, this film is going to just barely get over $100 million worldwide. As a Transformers movie that's actually getting a lot of very strong praise, that is a very surprising figure to see and really just shows you how much damage has been done. The reported budget for the film is only $75 million, and so even at that low number, because it's going to get only to a little over $100 million, and hey, you could argue maybe if down the line, week 3, week 4, the holds end up being better than the week 1 to week 2 hold, maybe it could end up being a chart breaker. Based on what we're seeing right now, I just don't think that's going to happen. 64 to 45 million in losses. And again, this is a 2.5 multiplier factor. So we're looking at probably something closer to $75+ million in financial losses by the end of its run. So not a good sign for Transformers 1 at all. And again, this is what happens when you let Michael Bay take over and run the Transformers franchise into the ground. The Substance, we can also make some projections on. A lower budgeted film here at only $17.5 million, but at only 9.3 after 2 weeks. I'm projecting the film to get between 13.3 and 18.6, which means a loss of around 18 to 15. So in all, probably $25 million or so in financial losses for that film. Never Let Go only cost $20 million, but it's not really making a whole lot, right? $8.3 million as of this weekend, right? Just to double check there. We still are waiting on some internationals, and so this number could obviously change a little bit. In fact, let's see just how many countries this is even released in. Not really a whole lot, so I don't think we're waiting on too many to be reported. But again, obviously that number could easily change, but based off of where it is right now, unless that number changes quite drastically, projecting the film to get somewhere between 11.8 to 16.6 million by the end of its run, meaning a financial loss of between 22 and $20 million. When you account for it really being closer to times 3 its budget these days, probably closer to between around 30 to $35 million in losses there. So yeah, unless the internationals come in a big way, don't suspect that film to come in. So actually, let's go ahead, and because I know there'll be at least one person saying, well, actually, it's actually a lot higher than that than in your chart, even though I say how many times. Oh, yeah, that's just as the recording of this video, according to the numbers that I have in front of me. Let's go ahead and just dive into the Box Office Mojo numbers, because sometimes they have things up to date. Not always the case, but again, I just gotta always get that out there. So let's see if we can get the daily performances there. Never Let Go. Yeah, they're only reporting $98,000 on their site. So again, I've looked everywhere now, and as of right now, not looking like that's going to actually happen for this movie. And those are the numbers as they stand for the last 2 weeks. Let's see if any updates are here. We have Speak No Evil, as I mentioned, $4.8 million in net profit. They're going to continue to add to their overall profits. Not the biggest moneymaker in the world, but hey, a lot better than I think anyone else could have expected it to be. Am I Racist is still hanging around as well, $1.5 million in profits there, so still adding on to it. Daily Wire, I think, really could benefit for putting this thing onto Daily Wire Plus to actually give their subscribers a bone. I think that's a little ridiculous that they still have not done that at this point, or at least told them what they're going to do. And then Beetlejuice, because it has a huge portion coming internationally, it is not making nearly as much profit as it could, but still $36.8 million in profit is profit nonetheless, and so it's still looking to end between $50 and $100 million in net profit by the end of its run. Ultimately, a pretty big success in its own right, whereas films like 1992 and Afraid and Reagan all still financial flops at this point. And those are the numbers of this stand. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. A lot of that fire button over on Odyssey. Smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing, and Beetle people, have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Sunday, a blessed feast of St. Michael the Archangel. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribe Star people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people, have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed August, and as always, God bless.